You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go
I'm
wild.
sure they are. I don't know. I haven't seen the web.
Number 322.
Buckle your seatbelt. It's time for another episode of the Prepper Recon Podcast. Whether your plan is to bug out or bug in, CampingSurvival.com has all of your preparedness needs, including fish antibiotics, long-term storage food, water filters, bug-out bags, and first aid kits. Use coupon code PrepperRecon for 5% off your entire order at CampingSurvival.com. Our individual first aid kits are now on sale. They're MOLLE-compatible pouches in Coyote, ACU, OD, or Black. They're equipped with an Israeli battle dressing, quick clot, TK4 tourniquet, suture kit, and lots of extras. It's perfect for your car, bug-out bag, or home first aid kit. Go to the PrepperRecon.com homepage and click on the IFAC store tab at the top of the page. They're on sale for $89, and that includes shipping. This kit could save your life. Today's guest is Richard Duarte. Richard is the author of Surviving Doomsday. Richard, welcome back on the show.
Hey, Mark. It's great to be here.
Oh, absolutely. It's good to have you back on the show. We had a great conversation last time you were on, and so I thought, let's do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of things have changed since we last spoke. 2014 has been a really busy year. We've been involved in lots and lots of projects, and, although we never have enough time to do all the things we want to do, we get involved in as much as we can, and sometimes too much. But, the one thing we haven't been able to do this year that I'm really sorry about is we haven't been able to do any of the prepper shows, any of the prepper expos. It just hasn't been possible, and the travel time and arranging it and making plans, it's just been too overwhelming, and unfortunately we've had to bow out of a few shows.
Sure, but now we met at the Life Changes Be Ready Expo in Lakeland, Florida last year, and that was Jim and Cindy Thompson that put that on. Just great folks, very super folks, and very, very professional. And now they're doing the Summer of Survival webinars, which is going to be going all summer, every Tuesday and Thursday night, and you're going to be a presenter there.
Absolutely, and you know what? I'm super, super happy to be a part of that because these guys, they really know how to do things right. They've put together a tremendous program. It's 12 weeks, 24 webinars, and they've gone out and they've gotten some of the leading experts in the preparedness community. Total of 36 hours of advanced training. And, the best part about it, Mark, and this is amazing to me, but it's all free. All people have to do is go to their website, sign up, and they could listen to every single session and even ask questions at the end of each session, because that's another aspect of this that's unique to these guys. They've figured out a way so that you can not only listen to the webinar, but at the end, if you have any questions or if you want to participate, you can chime in, and they will actually answer your particular question on the spot. So, I got to tell you, I don't think there's anything out there that even comes close to what these guys are doing and how they're doing it. So my hat's off to them. What I've done to make it as easy as possible for people to be able to hook up with the Summer of Survival is I've actually put a link on my website. It's survivingdoomsdaythebook.com, survivingdoomsdaythebook.com. And if folks go to that site, that's my blog, they'll be able just to hit the link, and they'll take them right into the Summer of Survival information page, and they'll be able to sign up and participate in all the webinars.
And I was just on your blog last night checking it out, and it looks like you've been really busy. You've been writing for some other preparedness-related magazines.
Yeah, we've got a whole bunch of stuff going on. As you know, I'm an attorney and I have a full-time law practice, so that in and of itself will usually occupy most of your time, regardless of what else you decide to do. But in addition to that, I continue writing my own material for my blog. I'm working on a second book. I'm writing for SWAT magazine. I'm writing for Off Grid magazine, Prepper and Shooter magazine, and Z-Day Survivor magazine. And if that wasn't enough, we also have an urban survival consulting business where folks will call us and say, Richard, how can you help us prepare? How can you come in and do an evaluation of our preps, of our house, of our business, of our plan, and make specific recommendations as to how we could either improve it or take it to the next level, or do something completely different from the ground up. So we're involved in all that, and one of the reasons why I like writing for some of these publications is when I come up with an idea and I want to include it, I usually have to wait until I write my next book. Either that or I have to make a blog entry. When I write for these magazines, I'm able to write a feature-length article with pictures and captions and all the other good stuff, and I'm able to get it out there within a matter of months versus having to wait a year or two until I write the next book.
Sure, and you write a lot on urban preparedness, and that's so important because a lot of folks are, like you, they're tied to their urban area because of their job or family or whatever, and bugging out to the boonies for them is just not an option because it would create their own personal stuff hits the fan moment financially because they'd lose their job.
Yeah, and I see a lot of things nowadays that folks recommend that I just don't think are practical. And when you sit down and you start formulating your own disaster planning, your own preparedness plan, you really have to sit down and say, okay, this guy, he's a really well-respected survival expert, and he recommends this, but does that really make sense for me? And it doesn't mean that the information you got is wrong or incorrect. It just means that it may not make sense for your particular situation. And that's always the test of whether something gets incorporated into your plan or not, whether it makes sense for you.
That's right. Now, what's on your radar these days that could affect our way of life?
Mark, I'm really concerned about a whole bunch of things, but there are some things that really concern me, and among them are weather-related events. I see that as a huge issue. I think last year we saw lots of strange weather all over the world, all over the United States. We saw these massive floods, massive droughts, monster storms, and all these events have the potential to cause all kinds of havoc, death, destruction, property damage, and we take it very lightly. We walk around thinking that we're in control and that we can deal with whatever comes our way, and in reality, Mother Nature, nobody controls Mother Nature, and the things that come our way sometimes, like for example, Superstorm Sandy. We were completely unprepared to deal with anything remotely similar, yet there it was right on our doorstep, and we had no choice. And there are families, believe it or not, till today that are still recovering from that storm. So that really concerns me. I'm also concerned with economic situation here in the United States and in fact abroad. I see food prices as a big problem. I think inflation is much higher than what they report. I see food and water shortages here and around the world as a major problem. And I think that these problems can sometimes lead to other problems. For example, I was talking to somebody the other day, and we both came to the same conclusion that a lot of the instability in many parts of the world is actually caused by food and water shortages, and as we all know, desperate people do desperate things. So I think about all those things and I worry about them, and the more I see, the more I realize that some of these folks just have no way of preparing, but we do. We have the ability to plan and to prepare and to really start thinking ahead and seeing how we would deal with something like this should it come our way.
And while we're on the topic of economics, the stock markets just keeps breaking new record highs. It seems like every week lately. Do you think that that's rational, or do you think we've got some irrational exuberance, as they like to call it?
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, Mark. Ever since 2008, we've been on shaky ground, and I think even before then we were on shaky grounds, and we're still not out of the woods. A lot of folks look at the stock market, for example, and they say, wow, we're almost at 17,000. The Dow is almost at 17,000. Those are record high levels. And, everything must be going really, really well for the Dow to be that high. I look at it and I think the opposite. I think, we go from one bubble to the next. It was the dot-com bubble. It was the housing bubble. Now we're approaching what I think is a credit card debt bubble. We're close to $850 billion in credit card debt as a nation, and that's an outrageous amount of money. That's just crazy money. And folks, and it's not because of the debt itself, it's how we got there. I think a lot of folks, especially after the things that happened in 2008, they've never quite recovered, and they didn't respond to those changes by lowering their standard of living. They kept their standard of living in many instances and made up the difference with credit cards and home equity lines of credit. So, now you have people that are literally running a deficit, and they're putting the difference on that credit card. Big problem. And soon, how long can you do that before it catches up to you? And then the other problem I see is the student loan debt. Lots and lots of people are graduating with massive amounts of debt that they have no hope of ever being able to pay off because the jobs just aren't there. And when they do find jobs, they're not the type of jobs that will pay enough for them to be able to support themselves and also service that debt. So we're on the verge of seeing an entire generation of young people that graduate college owing more money than they'll ever be able to pay back, and not having the potential of making a living to the point where they'll be able to support themselves and pay off their debt. So it's a really bad situation. They have this thing called the stock market fear index, and the stock market fear index is at an all-time low.
I think it was at an all-time low in the Roaring '20s too, wasn't it? And it was pretty low in 2008 when everybody was buying new investment homes every week, and it was the fear index was low in those two periods as well. But what came shortly afterwards was very dramatic, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you wonder, you say to yourself, if we are so confident that everything is going well, why are we experiencing all these other problems? And you have so many investors that are fearlessly going into the market and investing huge sums of money. You always assume that somebody who's smarter than you knows what they're doing, and it must be okay. Therefore, I'll do the same thing. And that's what everybody did right before the stock market crashed the last time.
And you made a comment about student loan debts, and I think that a lot of the folks that are coming out of that in that 18 to 34-year-old population bracket, they have the lowest labor participation rate that they've ever had for that bracket. And I think a lot of that may be because they know that if they take the entry level job, or they take the job at Walmart or McDonald's or whatever, they're going to trigger the repayment for their student loans, and they'll have to start making those payments back. Whereas if they just stay at home, then hold out in hopes of getting something better, at least they won't trigger the repayment on the debt. And I think a third of the people in that category, 18 to 34, are still living at home with their parents.
Right. Yeah, which is incredible. And I got to tell you, Mark, if we were at a 17,000 level with the Dow, and if it was for good reason, because the financial fundamentals were solid, I'd be happy. I'd be jumping up and down like everybody else and putting my money in the market. But I think we're at that level because we've used a lot of Peter to pay Paul. And we're shifting monies around from one place to another. And it all seems to work out, but until you sit down and you start drilling down into those numbers and really finding out where this money's coming from and where it's going, and then it doesn't look that rosy.
Yeah, that's true. And we are certainly getting into territory where we could experience another very serious downdraft in the markets. Now, you wrote a recent article in SWAT magazine about keeping your cool when it hits the fan. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, SWAT's a great publication. I'm really happy. I'm a contributing writer on their staff, and they put out a great magazine every month. SWAT actually stands for Survival Weapons and Tactics, and the magazine focuses on firearms and preparedness and self-reliance. One of the things that I felt, or I still feel, is very important, but yet I think it's underreported on, is the psychological aspect of what happens to people when there's a disaster. And I know from personal experience that, it could be very stressful, and in fact, it's normal to get stressed out, but that stress can sometimes turn to fear and panic and desperation. And, one of the things that I felt would be important to put out there for folks and to have them start thinking about it and planning is how to make the best of the situation, to put out tips and techniques and preparations that they can make ahead of time to ensure that when the moment comes, they're going to be in the best possible position to deal with the situation with the least amount of stress. And again, I know I always keep harping on the same thing, but the more prepared you are for a particular situation, the more you run that scenario through your mind, the more you've thought about the possible options and what you can do, and the more you've covered your bases, the more likely you are not to have an unfavorable response when the moment comes. And the whole idea is that if you've made solid preparations and you've made plans for your food, for your water, for your medical, for your first aid, for your self-defense, you'll be in a much better position to deal with the situation all around than somebody who didn't. And I'll give you a perfect example. A lot of people, South Florida has a lot of a big elderly population. And a lot of those folks are on medication, and they have to take that medication every day in order to stay healthy. Well, if a disaster were to happen and you had a limited amount of medication at home and you didn't have access to your doctor or your drugstore, now all of a sudden you're going to find yourself without any of that medication, and you're going to find yourself in a very difficult situation, especially folks who take medication for high blood pressure, for diabetes. These are medications you really can't be without. And if you haven't planned and if you haven't stored a supply where you know that you'll be okay for a certain period of time, what do you do? What are your options? So, that's one of the things we always recommend. Make sure you have enough of whatever prescription medication you take on hand so that if there is an interruption in service, for example, for a week or two or even a month, you know that you're covered. Big difference in stress levels between somebody who has a month of their medication and somebody who has 3 days worth of their medication.
And that translates over into just about every area of life. So it certainly translates well for disaster preparedness. If you think about public speaking, if you know your material and you're ready, it's going to be so much less stressful of an event if you're prepared. Or a school test, if you've studied up and you know the material and you're ready for the test. And I'm sure you being an attorney, if you have a court case and you're not prepared, I'm sure it's going to be much more stressful of a hearing than if you're ready for it. And so that's naturally going to translate over into any type of disaster preparedness, whether it's for a hurricane or an economic collapse.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the July issue of SWAT, I've got another article, and that one is about the 10 most neglected preps. And, one of the things that I mentioned in there are the things that just, nobody ever thinks about. Like, for example, if you wear glasses and, you need those glasses to be able to see, do you have an extra pair somewhere in case of an emergency? I can tell you from experience that during Andrew, I lost my glasses. When the house started to come apart and the wind came inside the house, it just knocked out, everything in sight, and including my glasses there. It knocked straight off my face. So I couldn't see. Now, you're in a disaster, you're in a high stress situation, and on top of that, add the fact that now you can't see. What does that do to your stress level? So these are all things that we don't think about all the time. We should, but I find that it's good to put it out there, and the moment people see it, they say to themselves, "Oh my God, that's true. I never thought about that. I'm going to have to do that. Either I'll get a second pair next time I get my prescription filled, or I'll keep the old pair as a backup."
Yeah. And now you had another article in Prepper and Shooter magazine about prepper kits for your car. What should we be keeping in our cars?
That's a great article because a lot of us spend a lot of time in our cars, and the problem there is that most of us, we don't even bother to check to see if our spare has air in it, or that our jack has all the parts we need to be able to jack up the car should we get a flat. So what I did is I put together a list of all the things that we should have while we're on the road. And, of course, that's going to change depending on where you live and what kind of roads you travel. Like, for example, here in South Florida, a lot of what we travel on a daily basis is very urban. So we wouldn't have the same needs, for example, as somebody who's out in a very rural environment, and they may not be able to call for help, or if they can, help may not be able to get to them for a long time. So, depending on what area of the country you're at, and depending on your situation. But in that article, I put in a complete list, and it's what you would expect. I mean, flashlights, tools, flares, jumper cables, all those kind of things. But I also add, again, food, water. I also add medication, because if you get stuck away from home, let's say, and you need to make repairs somewhere, and you can't get home right away, you can't assume you're always going to be able to get back home to take your medication. So keep 2, 3, 4, 5 days worth of medication in your car in the event you're stranded somewhere. Now you don't have the added headache of maybe a sickness or an illness flaring up because you didn't take your medication. Maps, spare glasses. It's an extensive list. I mean, I don't remember all the items right now, but if you read the article, I think, anybody who spends any amount of time in a car needs to have that stuff in their car.
Now, and you live in my neck of the woods, and hurricane season's here for us. Are you all set for hurricane season?
Well, I got to tell you, I've lived through many hurricanes down here in South Florida, and you never feel ready. No matter what you do, you somehow feel it's never enough, because every time you start going through your preps, you always say to yourself, "Oh man, I forgot this," and then you go back. But that's just part of prepping. It's an ongoing process. It's not something that you do over a long weekend and then forget about. It's a lifestyle, and you're constantly refining and improving your preps. So it's natural to feel that way. But I always use the beginning of hurricane season to get people to start thinking and focusing on the possibilities. We need to be able to be ready, and we can't wait for a storm to be announced until we run out and start trying to make all the preps that we should have been making all along. And the reason for that is, you can certainly wait, but everybody else is waiting too. And when they do announce any kind of a tropical disturbance in the Atlantic, you'll quickly see hundreds of people descending upon the gas stations, supermarkets, and they're all trying to get the same thing at the same time. And it's a madhouse. And you see people fighting and yelling at each other, and, that's just a scene that, I best avoid.
Absolutely. And what do you think people forget about after not being hit by a hurricane for a couple of years?
We've had a couple of quiet seasons, and that's a double-edged sword. By no means am I ungrateful for that. I'm very grateful that we've had no activity in the last few years, but by the same token, people have a very short memory. And when you see a couple of quiet seasons, all of a sudden the awareness goes down, the level of preparation goes down, and people get distracted and start thinking about other things, where they're going to go on vacation, if the Heat is playing tonight, who's going to win the soccer tournament, and the hurricane preparedness just goes out the window completely. And we've suffered some tremendous storms down here, and you would think that, given our history, people would be hyper vigilant, but they're not. Again, once a couple of quiet years go by, they just assume every year from now on it's going to be the same, and you see all the preps go way down. So, my job, unfortunately, sometimes is very, very difficult, because even with friends and relatives, I'll start talking to them about the hurricane season and the fact that they have to prepare, and they're like, "Oh, come on, Richard, we don't want to talk about that. Let's talk about something happy." And I'm like, "Well, this is happy. I'm happy knowing that my family is going to be safe. I'm happy knowing that I can provide for them in the event of a 2-week power outage, or if the supermarkets are closed, or if the gas station isn't pumping gas. I'm happy to be able to know that I've done everything I can to take care of them and to take care of myself, and even possibly take care of other people because of my efforts." But I think people don't want to deal with any kind of bad news or negativity, and that's the way they see it. And unfortunately, they all wait till the last minute, and then at the last minute, what they end up doing is something that's really substandard. And sometimes they get lucky and they get by. Other times, they suffer for it greatly.
That's true. You've given us a lot of good stuff to think about today. And, of course, we'll have links in today's show notes to purchase your book, Surviving Doomsday. But for folks listening on Stitcher, YouTube, or iTunes, can you tell them where they can find your book?
The best way to get it is at Amazon.com. We have the paperback. We also have the Kindle, and we have a real special promotion going on now with the Kindle Match, where if you buy the paperback, you actually get the Kindle version for just 99 cents, which is practically free. And a lot of folks are doing that because they like the e-readers, but they also know that in the event of a power outage, they'd rather have that hard copy in their hands that they know they're going to be able to refer to no matter whether there's power or not. And there's a lot of reference information. My book is not a book that you would sit down, read, and then there's no use for it anymore. It's the type of book that you sit down, you read, and then you go back to often, because I give you, for example, the measurements for how to disinfect water with liquid chlorine, how to do it with iodine, how to do it with sunlight, how to do it with boiling. And these are all facts that people tend to forget, but all I have to do is go to the water chapter, for example, and look up water disinfection, and I give them all the information right there. So it's also a reference book. And that's one of the reasons why I tell them, listen, make sure you have a paper copy of it so that when something goes wrong, you have something to refer to. And I do the same thing with the food, the first aid, the medical, the self-defense, the sanitation, and the hygiene, and knowing when to get out, when to stay put. These are all sections that are broken out in the book, so that if all you're interested in is, let's say, food at that moment, you can go to the food section and everything's there, including a list at the back of each chapter of what you should be buying and storing. I also tend to post a lot of information on Facebook and Twitter. So, I encourage people to go and like or follow me on Facebook and Twitter, because every time something comes up of interest, I post it right away.
And then if they go to your blog, they can link to your Facebook and your Twitter accounts to your blog?
Absolutely, and that's what I was going to say. If they just go to survivingdoomsdaythebook.com, they can link through there to all my social media.
Richard, thanks again for coming back on the show. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me, and thank you for a great show.
American Reset, the long-awaited conclusion of the Economic Collapse Chronicles, is now available. In Book 3, the ultimate contest between liberty and tyranny reaches the apex. The Bear family and their neighbors fight to survive the fallout of the meltdown and cling to the principles in the Constitution. Will the collapse bring an oppressive regime that enslaves the American people, or will the patriots prevail and guide the country back to freedom, peace, and prosperity? Get your copy in Kindle, audio, or paperback on Amazon today.